The Apache helicopter's rotors thundered overhead as Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood in line at the military commissary, just another face in the crowd. She wore civilian clothes, jeans, a simple t-shirt, nothing that would draw attention. To everyone around her, she was nobody special. Just another military spouse, maybe, or a contractor's daughter. But when Captain Jake Rodriguez, the base's top Apache pilot, caught a glimpse of the small tattoo on her wrist as she reached for her groceries, his blood ran cold. That tiny symbol, 3 simple lines that most would dismiss as meaningless, told a story that would shake him to his core. Because Jake recognized it, and he knew exactly what it meant. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Carson as Sarah Chen made her way through the commissary entrance, her canvas shopping bag slung casually over her shoulder. At 32, she had perfected the art of blending in. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, no makeup, wearing the kind of unremarkable jeans and navy blue t-shirt that made her invisible among the sea of military families doing their weekly shopping. She moved with quiet efficiency through the aisles, selecting items with the practiced ease of someone who had done this routine countless times before. Other shoppers barely glanced her way. She was just another face in the crowd, perhaps the wife of some enlisted soldier, or maybe a contractor's daughter. Nobody special. 3 aisles over, Captain Jake Rodriguez was grabbing energy drinks and protein bars, still riding the adrenaline high from his morning Apache training flight. At 29, Jake was everything Sarah appeared not to be. Confident, decorated, impossible to miss. His flight suit bore the patches of his squadron, and even in civilian clothes, he carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of a combat pilot. He'd flown over 200 combat missions, earned a distinguished flying cross, and commanded respect from every soldier on base. Jake thrived on recognition, on being known as one of the best Apache pilots in the Army. As he rounded the corner toward the checkout lanes, his eyes automatically scanned the crowd, a habit formed from years of situational awareness training. That's when he saw her. The woman in the unremarkable clothes, reaching up to grab a box of cereal from a high shelf. There was something about the way she moved, controlled, precise, economical. Jake found himself watching as she continued her shopping, noting how her eyes constantly swept her surroundings, how she positioned herself to keep sight lines clear, how she moved through the store with a subtle efficiency that most people would never notice. It wasn't the behavior of a typical military spouse or civilian contractor. It was the movement pattern of someone with serious training. Sarah felt the weight of observation but didn't react immediately. Years of experience had taught her to identify when she was being watched, and right now, someone was definitely paying attention. She continued her shopping routine, her peripheral vision tracking the tall figure in the flight suit who seemed to be taking more interest in her than the energy drinks in his basket. She'd seen him before around the base, Captain Rodriguez, one of the Apache pilots. His reputation preceded him, skilled, confident, and completely unaware that the woman he was studying had probably logged more combat hours than he had. Jake positioned himself 2 people behind her in the checkout line, still trying to figure out what it was about this woman that had caught his attention. She was polite to the cashier, patient with the elderly man ahead of her who was fumbling with his military ID, and seemed completely at ease in an environment where most civilians appeared slightly out of place. As she reached into her purse to pay, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing her left wrist. Jake's breath caught in his throat. There, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, was a small tattoo. 3 simple black lines arranged in a specific pattern. Most people would dismiss it as meaningless, maybe even assume it was just a decorative design. But Jake knew better. The tattoo was a Ranger tab, not the full colorful patch that Rangers wore on their uniforms, but the minimalist, understated version that some special operations veterans chose when they wanted to carry their service with them, without announcing it to the world. Jake had seen it only a handful of times before, always on hardened veterans who had earned the right to wear it through some of the most demanding military training in existence. His mind raced as he processed what he was seeing. This quiet, unassuming woman who blended into the background of base life was a Ranger. Not just any soldier, but one of the elite few who had passed through the crucible of Ranger school and earned the right to wear that tab. Sarah completed her transaction and gathered her bags, still aware of the pilot's scrutiny but giving no indication that she'd noticed. As she walked toward the exit, Jake stood frozen in the checkout line, his energy drinks forgotten. Everything about her made sense now. The way she moved, the constant awareness, the controlled precision. She wasn't trying to be invisible because she was unremarkable. She was invisible because she chose to be. The question that burned in Jake's mind as he watched her disappear into the parking lot was simple. Why would someone who had earned the right to wear one of the Army's most prestigious badges choose instead to hide in plain sight? Jake couldn't concentrate during his afternoon briefing. As his squadron commander droned on about upcoming training exercises and maintenance schedules, Jake's mind kept returning to the woman in the commissary. The more he thought about it, the more questions multiplied in his head. Female rangers were incredibly rare. The tab had only been opened to women a few years ago, and the graduation rate was brutal regardless of gender. Whoever she was, she had accomplished something that less than 3% of soldiers who attempted ranger school ever achieved. Yet here she was, shopping for groceries like any other base resident, completely under the radar. After the briefing, Jake found himself walking past the commissary again, hoping to catch another glimpse of her. It was ridiculous behavior for someone of his rank and experience, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stumbled onto something significant. He'd spent his entire career surrounded by high achievers and decorated veterans, but they all wore their accomplishments proudly. Patches, ribbons, the way they carried themselves. Military culture was built on recognition and hierarchy. This woman was operating by completely different rules. That evening, Jake tried a different approach. He started asking casual questions around the base, describing the woman without mentioning what he'd seen. About 32, Asian American, dark hair, usually in civilian clothes around the commissary. The responses were frustratingly consistent. A few people had seen her around, but knew nothing about her. She volunteered sometimes at the family readiness group events. Helped with the spouse support network. Always quiet, always helpful, never drawing attention to herself. One sergeant's wife mentioned that she'd offered to help organize a charity drive for deployed soldiers' families, displaying an understanding of military life that suggested she wasn't just a civilian contractor. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Master Sergeant Williams, Jake's crew chief, was grabbing coffee in the break room when Jake casually brought up his mystery woman. "Sounds like Sarah Chen," Williams said without hesitation. "Lives in base housing, building 447. Her husband was deployed about 8 months ago, Special Forces, I think. She keeps to herself mostly, but she's good people. Helped my wife when our youngest was in the hospital last month. Knew exactly how to navigate the military medical system." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Special Forces marriages often meant both spouses had military backgrounds, and the way she'd navigated the medical bureaucracy suggested first-hand experience, not just the learned knowledge of a military spouse. Jake spent the next 2 days observing from a distance, hating himself for what felt like stalking but unable to let go of his curiosity. Sarah Chen maintained her routine with clockwork precision, commissary runs, volunteer work, occasional visits to the base library, but now that he knew what to look for, Jake began noticing details that painted a different picture. The way she automatically positioned herself with back to walls and clear sight lines to exits, how she unconsciously scanned crowds and identified potential threats. The fact that she jogged the same route every morning at 05:30 hours, maintaining a pace that would challenge most soldiers half her age. The moment of truth came on a Thursday afternoon, when Jake was walking past the base gym. Through the windows, he could see someone using the pull-up bars with a form and intensity that caught his attention. It was Sarah, and she was cranking out strict pull-ups with a technique that spoke of serious military fitness standards. Jake counted 25 before she dropped down, barely breathing hard. As she moved to the parallel bars, Jake noticed something else that made his heart race. When she removed her sweatshirt, the full extent of her left arm became visible. Above the small Ranger tab tattoo on her wrist, partially hidden by her t-shirt sleeve, was another mark. Jake couldn't make out the details, but the positioning and size suggested it might be a unit patch or another specialized qualification. That night, Jake lay awake staring at the ceiling of his barracks room, wrestling with what he'd discovered. Every instinct told him that Sarah Chen was not just a ranger, but someone with a story that went far deeper than even that prestigious qualification suggested. The question that kept him awake wasn't just who she was, but why someone with her obvious capabilities was choosing to live in the shadows. In Jake's world, achievement was meant to be displayed, recognized, celebrated. Sarah Chen was operating by rules he didn't understand, and it was driving him crazy. By morning, he'd made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He was going to find out the truth, even if it meant confronting her directly and risking the comfortable anonymity she'd worked so hard to maintain. Jake found his opportunity on a quiet Saturday morning when he spotted Sarah at the base coffee shop, sitting alone with a book and what appeared to be mission planning documents spread across her table. She was wearing civilian clothes as always, but the papers in front of her looked decidedly military. Taking a deep breath and summoning the courage that had carried him through countless combat missions, Jake approached her table. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Chen?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled despite the racing of his heart. Sarah looked up from her reading, her dark eyes immediately assessing. She'd been expecting this conversation eventually. The pilot had been too obvious in his observation over the past week, and she'd recognized the look in his eyes at the commissary. It was the expression of someone who'd seen something they weren't supposed to see. "I am," she replied simply, gesturing to the chair across from her. "You're Captain Rodriguez, please sit down." Her calm acceptance of his approach told Jake everything he needed to know about her level of situational awareness and tactical thinking. "I saw your tattoo," Jake said quietly, settling into the chair and keeping his voice low. "The one on your wrist. I know what it means." Sarah's expression didn't change, but Jake caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested he'd confirmed what she already suspected. She closed the folder containing her documents and leaned back in her chair, studying him with the same intensity he'd been directing at her all week. "And what do you think it means, Captain?" she asked, her tone neutral but with an undertone that suggested she was measuring his response carefully. Jake took a breath and committed fully to the conversation that would reveal everything. "It's a Ranger tab. Minimalist design, the kind that Rangers sometimes get when they want to carry their service with them without broadcasting it. Which means you graduated from Ranger School, something that less than 3% of soldiers ever accomplish. What I can't figure out is why someone with that qualification is shopping for groceries and volunteering at spouse events instead of wearing the uniform and the recognition that comes with it." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and Jake could see her making calculations behind her eyes, deciding how much truth to reveal to this persistent Apache pilot who'd stumbled onto her carefully guarded secret. "My name is Sarah Chen," she began slowly. "And yes, I am a Ranger. But that's not the whole story, Captain Rodriguez. I'm also a Special Forces medic, qualified in combat trauma surgery, with 3 deployments to Afghanistan and 2 to Syria. The documents you saw me reading are casualty reports and after-action reviews from recent operations. I'm currently attached to the 5th Special Forces Group as a civilian contractor, providing medical training and tactical consultation." Jake felt his world tilt as the implications of her words sank in. She wasn't just a Ranger. She was one of the most highly qualified soldiers he'd ever encountered, operating at a level that made his own impressive record seem almost pedestrian by comparison. Sarah continued, her voice taking on a tone that spoke of hard-earned wisdom and painful experience. "I chose to step back from active duty after my last deployment. Lost too many good soldiers, saved others who went right back into harm's way. The tattoo on my wrist isn't just a Ranger tab, Jake. It's a reminder of every soldier who didn't make it home. Every mission where my medical skills made the difference between life and death. I don't wear the uniform anymore because I needed distance from that identity, but I couldn't completely walk away from serving. So I do it quietly, training the next generation of medics, reviewing operations to help prevent future casualties, supporting military families who understand what deployment stress really means." Jake sat in stunned silence as Sarah rolled up her sleeve slightly, revealing the second tattoo he'd glimpsed at the gym. It was a combat medical badge surrounded by small stars, each one representing a life saved under fire. "I've performed surgery in foxholes, extracted wounded soldiers from burning vehicles, and spent more time in combat zones than most infantry soldiers. But I also learned that there's more than one way to serve, and sometimes the most important work happens away from the spotlight. My husband is currently deployed with an ODA team, and he understands why I choose to honor my service this way, rather than seeking recognition for it. The conversation that followed changed both their lives. Jake shared his own struggles with the pressure of constant performance and recognition, admitting that he'd never considered what it might be like to serve without the need for external validation. Sarah talked about the freedom she'd found in anonymous service, the way it allowed her to focus on the mission rather than the career implications. As they spoke, Jake realized he was in the presence of someone who embodied everything he'd thought he wanted to be, a warrior with nothing left to prove. By the time they parted that morning, Jake had gained not just answers to his questions but a completely new perspective on what military service could look like. Sarah Chen wasn't hiding from her past. She was choosing how to carry it forward. Her small tattoo represented not a secret to be hidden but a truth so profound that it needed no external validation. As Jake walked back to his barracks, he found himself thinking about his own patches and ribbons differently, wondering if true strength might sometimes be found not in displaying your achievements, but in knowing them so deeply that recognition from others becomes unnecessary. Sarah Chen had taught him that sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones who choose to remain nobody special, and that there's a kind of courage in serving without seeking glory that might be the highest form of military honor. The story of Sarah Chen reminds us that heroism doesn't always wear a uniform or seek the spotlight. In military bases around the world, there are countless men and women who carry extraordinary stories beneath ordinary exteriors. Veterans who've earned the right to recognition, but choose instead the quiet dignity of continued service. They're the ones organizing charity drives, supporting military families, training the next generation, and carrying forward the values they learned in combat zones and special operations units. Captain Jake Rodriguez learned something that day that no amount of flight training could have taught him. That true military excellence is not measured by the patches on your chest or the recognition in your personnel file, but by your commitment to the mission and the people who serve alongside you. Sarah Chen's choice to serve without seeking glory represents the highest ideals of military service: duty, honor, and sacrifice, without the need for external validation. These stories matter because they remind us that every person we encounter might be carrying experiences and achievements that would humble us if we knew the full truth. The quiet volunteer at the commissary might be a decorated combat veteran. The helpful neighbor who knows how to navigate military bureaucracy might have earned that knowledge through years of special operations service. The unassuming woman reaching for cereal might be someone who saved lives under fire and chose to continue serving in ways that require no recognition. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel to hear more tales of quiet heroism and extraordinary service. Share this video with someone who understands that the most important battles are often fought by people who never seek credit for their victories. And remember, the next time you encounter someone who seems like nobody special, you might be in the presence of greatness that simply chooses not to announce itself. Honor our veterans, respect their choices about how they carry their service, and never forget that true heroes walk among us every day, wearing civilian clothes and carrying military hearts.